My name is Russell. I am 62 years old. I spent my entire life working as a mechanic in Sioux Falls to raise my only son. My son drained my entire retirement fund and vanished with his new wife. I was completely devastated until my lawyer said, "Don't panic. Let me handle this." Then exactly 1 week later, they called in absolute terror. Before I expose this ruthless plan, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments if you've ever been betrayed by your own flesh and blood. I read every single one. That night I opened my banking app. I had just moved my entire retirement fund into a joint checking account in preparation for an investment, and figured I'd transfer a small amount as a late wedding gift for the kids. The screen loaded and my heart seemed to stop. The balance showed $0. Over $400,000 of my life's work had vanished. I frantically swiped the screen to check the transaction history. A massive wire transfer had been successfully executed 5 days prior. The thief didn't need to hack the system, because this transaction was legally authorized under a power of attorney. The entire amount was transferred straight into the private account of my son and his wife. A wave of shock washed over me. I muttered unconsciously, "No, this can't be a mistake. My boy would never do that." As soon as the sun came up, I drove straight to their apartment complex on the west side of Sioux Falls to demand an explanation. The streets were quiet, and the crisp morning air bit at my face as I hurried across the cracked asphalt parking lot. I marched up the concrete stairs to the second floor, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached their unit and pounded my calloused fist against the familiar wooden door. Silence greeted me. I knocked again, much harder this time, calling out Preston's name loudly. The sound echoed down the empty hallway, but there was no rustling inside. No footsteps approaching the peephole. Just a heavy, suffocating stillness that made my stomach churn. A nearby door creaked open down the hall, and the building manager poked his head out to investigate the noise. He was an older guy, wearing a faded flannel shirt, holding a steaming mug of coffee. He looked at me with a distinct mix of pity and confusion. He walked over slowly and delivered the news that completely shattered my reality. He confirmed that the young couple had abruptly broken their lease. They paid the hefty cancellation penalty up front with a thick stack of cash and loaded all their belongings into a rented moving truck exactly 2 days ago. They were gone. The apartment behind that locked door was completely empty. I stumbled back, leaning heavily against the cold hallway wall to steady my shaking legs. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket, my mind racing to comprehend how this massive transaction could happen in total secrecy. I opened the banking application again, bypassing the main screen, and dug deep into the security and account settings. The bitter truth stared back at me through the bright display. Preston had utilized the legal power of attorney to officially alter the primary contact information on my profile. He had changed the alert email address to a strange one I did not recognize. That was the exact reason I remained completely in the dark for 5 entire days while they drained my life savings. Desperation seized my chest with an iron grip. I dialed Preston's number, praying to hear his voice, praying for some convoluted excuse that would make sense of this nightmare. The line clicked, followed instantly by the automated voice of the carrier, stating the number was unreachable. I immediately dialed Justine. The exact same lifeless tone echoed in my ear. They had both blocked my number. At that precise moment, the final wall of my denial collapsed entirely. This was not a foolish mistake or a temporary lapse in judgment. This was a meticulously orchestrated theft and a calculated escape plan executed by the boy I had sacrificed absolutely everything to raise. I stood entirely alone in that bleak corridor, letting the crushing weight of the ultimate betrayal bring me to my knees. I completely broke down, weeping for the son I realized I had already lost. The gut-wrenching despair drove me into the oak-scented office of lawyer Flynn on Tuesday afternoon. I sat across from him in a heavy leather chair, sliding a manila folder across the polished mahogany desk. Inside were the bank statements and the original copy of a specific legal document. My hands trembled slightly as I explained the origin of that paper. I had signed that general power of attorney late last year, just days before undergoing a high-risk open-heart surgery. It was a terrifying period, and I wanted to ensure someone could legally handle my medical bills and property taxes if the procedure went wrong or the recovery took too long. I trusted my only child to manage my affairs temporarily, never imagining he would weaponize that signature against me. Lawyer Flynn did not interrupt my explanation. He possessed the sharp, analytical demeanor of a professional who had seen every ugly variation of familial betrayal. He calmly adjusted his glasses, picked up the document, and began meticulously scanning the dense paragraphs. The heavy grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking the agonizingly slow passage of time while I waited for his verdict. I watched his eyes dart back and forth across the complex legal jargon. Suddenly, the tension in his shoulders relaxed. He lowered the paperwork, setting it flat on his desk, and a faint, sharp smirk appeared on his face. He tapped a specific paragraph with the tip of his silver pen and pointed out a crucial ray of hope. Flynn explained that while the document granted broad financial management rights, it was a standard template. He noted that this paperwork entirely lacked a self-dealing authorization or any explicit gifting clause. Under state law, a designated fiduciary is legally bound to act solely in the best interest of the principal. Flynn clarified that transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars into a personal joint account shared with a new wife provides absolutely no benefit to the original account holder. The lawyer leaned back in his chair, weaving his fingers together, and broke down our exact legal standing. By orchestrating that massive wire transfer without my direct permission, Preston had not simply abused my trust. He had committed a textbook breach of fiduciary duty. It was a severe civil violation bordering on criminal financial exploitation. The law did not view this action as a simple family misunderstanding or an early inheritance. It viewed it as outright theft disguised by formal paperwork. Hearing those professional words shifted something deep inside my chest. The crushing helplessness began to recede, replaced by a cold and unfamiliar clarity. I was no longer an isolated victim standing alone. I finally had a weapon to fight back. Flynn leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. He looked straight into my exhausted eyes, his voice projecting a calm, absolute iron authority. "Don't panic," he said firmly. "Let me handle this." It took exactly 48 hours for Flynn's team to trace the path of the stolen money. My phone rang early Thursday morning, and the lawyer requested my immediate presence back at his office. When I arrived, a thick stack of printed financial records and wire logs already covered his desk. The private investigators had successfully tracked the electronic movement of my funds across state lines. Preston and Justine had not fled the country, nor were they attempting to hide the cash in some untraceable offshore shell corporation. Their actual plan was much more arrogant, deeply rooted in a desire for an immediate, flashy lifestyle upgrade. Flynn pointed the tip of his pen toward a highlighted bank ledger from a prominent southern financial institution. The young couple had aggressively moved the stolen capital down to a sun-drenched coastal city in Florida. However, they had not purchased a property outright just yet. The digital trail clearly revealed that $50,000 of my hard-earned retirement fund had already cleared the system as an earnest money deposit on a sprawling multi-million-dollar waterfront villa. The vast majority of my life savings was currently parked in a third-party title company's escrow account. Flynn tapped the document grimly, explaining the severe urgency of our current timeline. The couple was simply waiting for the final closing date, strictly scheduled for this upcoming weekend. The lawyer thoroughly laid out the brutal legal reality of our situation. If we allowed that Friday afternoon closing appointment to proceed, uninterrupted, the escrow officer would legally disburse my funds to the property seller, and the residential deed would be officially recorded under Justine's name. Recovering the stolen assets after a successful real estate closing would immediately transform from a challenging task into an absolute jurisdictional nightmare. It would potentially require years of complex, cross-state litigation, fighting against strict asset protection laws, just to untangle the mess. We were officially racing against a ticking clock. Hearing the sheer audacity of their meticulously calculated scheme fundamentally altered my psychological state. The suffocating grief and denial that had previously crippled me vanished completely. Any lingering pathetic hope that my son had merely made a foolish, impulsive mistake evaporated into thin air. I vividly pictured his new wife casually picking out expensive modern furniture using my sweat and blood, while Preston stood cowardly by her side, enabling the theft. That specific image ignited a freezing, highly calculated anger deep within my chest. I was no longer an old man mourning a lost relationship. I recognized them as two deliberate, unremorseful thieves who viewed my decades of grueling mechanical labor as nothing more than their personal lottery ticket. I leaned across the heavy desk, meeting Flynn's steady gaze, without a single ounce of hesitation or paternal weakness. I explicitly instructed him to tear their arrogant plan apart. I demanded he spare absolutely no expense and utilize every single aggressive legal weapon at his disposal to completely block that transaction before it was too late. To stop that transaction, we didn't need meaningless arguments or emotional pleas. What we needed was the brutal, unyielding power of the court system. Flynn moved with the calculated precision of a surgeon. Within hours, his paralegals had prepared a thick stack of filings, and he lodged a formal civil lawsuit in the state court. The charges were not light. We accused Preston and Justine of egregious breach of fiduciary duty, and more significantly, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. This specific statutory citation was critical because it categorized the theft not merely as a family dispute, but as a predatory act targeting an elder, which allowed for expedited judicial review and enhanced damages. But a lawsuit takes time to process, and we did not have the luxury of time. So alongside the complaint, Flynn petitioned the judge for an immediate ex parte temporary restraining order, TRO. He presented the wire transfer logs and the impending real estate closing date as irrefutable proof of irreparable harm. The judge agreed without hesitation. The gavel came down and the order was signed. This legal instrument acted as a digital weapon. It was instantly transmitted to every financial institution where my son held an account. The order effectively froze their assets in place. Their personal credit cards, their checking accounts, and even that joint account holding my retirement money were locked down tight. The most devastating blow, however, was aimed directly at their Florida dream. Flynn filed a lis pendens, a formal notice of pending litigation against the property title in the county records down south. This document acted like a radioactive warning label to the real estate world. No title company in America would insure a property with an active lis pendens attached to it. The escrow process didn't just stall, it imploded. The $50,000 deposit was now trapped in legal limbo, and the sellers would legally cancel the contract due to the buyer's inability to close. Finally, Flynn took the step that made this personal. He didn't just keep this in civil court. He compiled a dossier of the evidence, the abuse of the power of attorney, the isolation tactics, the theft, and formally referred the case to Adult Protective Services, APS, and the local district attorney's office. He was building a bridge from a civil dispute to a criminal indictment. We were no longer asking them to return the money. We were inviting the state to evaluate if they belonged in prison. We sat back in the office, the fax machine humming, as confirmation receipts poured in, watching the trap snap shut around them from 1,000 miles away. Exactly 1 week since the night I saw the round zero on the screen, the phone on the kitchen counter buzzed incessantly from an unknown number. I stared at the glowing digits for a brief moment, before swiping the green icon and lifting the receiver to my ear. I didn't even have the chance to say hello. The frantic, hyperventilating voice of my son immediately flooded the speaker. Preston was entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant man who had sneaked out of town just days prior. He was sobbing uncontrollably, his words stumbling over one another in a chaotic rush of pure terror. He frantically explained that a process server had just ambushed them outside a grocery store, handing them a thick stack of legal documents, including a formal court summons and the devastating temporary restraining order. The meticulous trap we set had finally snapped shut, and they were feeling the crushing mechanical force of the justice system. Preston wept as he confessed the immediate fallout. Their premium credit cards had been brutally declined at the checkout register in front of dozens of people. When he tried to access their banking application to transfer funds, a bold red security banner informed him that every single account was strictly frozen under a judicial mandate. Furthermore, the Florida real estate agent had already called to terminate the villa contract because the escrow deposit was legally gridlocked by our filings. Their luxurious coastal fantasy had evaporated into thin air, leaving them stranded and utterly penniless in an unfamiliar state. Through the receiver, another piercing sound cut across the background noise. It was Justine. She was no longer the smug, manipulative woman who thought she had successfully conned an old man out of his life savings. She was shrieking with sheer, unadulterated panic. I could hear her pacing, frantically demanding that Preston make me drop the civil lawsuit immediately. The terrifying realization that Adult Protective Services and the district attorney were actively reviewing their case for criminal financial exploitation had broken her spirit entirely. She was screaming hysterically about the very real prospect of serving time in a state prison. A month ago, hearing my son cry like that would have shattered my heart into 1,000,000 pieces. I would have moved heaven and earth to soothe his pain. But standing in my quiet kitchen that afternoon, I felt absolutely nothing. The paternal instinct to protect him had burned out, replaced by a cold, impenetrable wall of reality. I did not yell. I did not hurl insults or demand a pathetic apology. I simply took a deep breath, letting their desperate chaos wash over me without absorbing a single ounce of it. "From now on, speak to my legal representative," I stated with absolute icy calmness. Before Preston could formulate another pathetic excuse, I pulled the phone away from my face and pressed the end button. I navigated straight to the settings menu, permanently blocked the unknown number, and set the device face down on the granite countertop. The arduous process of recovering assets through civil judgments dragged on for 6 long months, which was also the exact amount of time I needed to learn how to clean up the wreckage of my own life. Thanks to Flynn's relentless pressure and the looming threat of a grand jury indictment, the resolution was swift and brutal. The court ordered full restitution, forcing the liquidation of every asset Preston and Justine had acquired to pay back the stolen funds. Facing the terrifying possibility of spending years in a state penitentiary, Preston ultimately accepted a plea deal negotiated by his public defender. He agreed to plead guilty to a felony charge of fraud in exchange for avoiding prison time. However, this mercy came with a heavy price. He was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation and now carries a permanent criminal record for financial fraud. That mark on his background check effectively destroyed his career prospects and ended his reputation in this town forever. As for Justine, her true nature revealed itself the moment the money ran out. Realizing that staying married to Preston meant sharing his massive debt and legal liability, she filed for divorce immediately. She packed her bags and vanished, leaving my son to face the ruins of his life, completely alone. I did not visit him. I did not bail him out. I let him sit in the mess he created. I sold the old house in Sioux Falls 2 weeks ago. Walking through the empty rooms, I realized that holding on to memories was not the same as protecting my future. I bought a smaller, quieter place in a different state, far away from the ghosts of this betrayal. I changed my phone number one last time, and gave the new digits only to Flynn and a few trusted friends. I have effectively cut all ties with the son I once knew. If there is one lesson I want to scream to every parent listening to this story, it is this: do not let love blind you to the necessity of boundaries. Legal tools like a power of attorney are essential for emergencies, but they are dangerous weapons if left unguarded. If you sign one for a surgery or a crisis, revoke it the absolute second you recover. Do not leave that door open out of politeness or trust. I used to believe that family was a sacred bond that required total sacrifice. I was wrong. Blood relation is not a guarantee of loyalty, and it is certainly not a shield against greed. True safety comes from realizing that protecting your financial independence is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of dignity. I am 62 years old, and I am starting over alone. But for the first time in a long time, I am sleeping soundly, knowing that the only person holding the keys to my survival is me.